Okay guys, today we're going to do a video on Overwatch 2 using the Steam Deck, starting it off with 800p on medium settings. I will be going back to low settings after this, but the recording order is just all over the place because this game was tough to get going. So it took me around 2 hours to get the game to actually start and become playable. You can't just import it into Steam as a non-Steam game and use Proton. The game will open up still and play for about 5 minutes, but it will freeze up after that and you gotta start the game all over again. I've tried experimental, I tried 7.0 and I tried GE as well, and they all don't work. They all freeze up eventually and the game isn't very playable. So right here I'm using Lutris, using Cafe 7.18 as the runner. I'll have a link for that in the description as well. It's a GitHub link. You download it and you can set it up. And even with that, the game still had some issues opening up. Couldn't open up Battle.net in gaming mode for a while, but after restarting a couple times, it ended up becoming playable. Just keep in mind that on your first boot, the game will be very stuttery. You'll be getting 2 to 3 FPS for about 5 to 10 minutes. And once you get into a match, the game will have to compile all the shaders for each new map and each character and ability. So the game will be stuttering again for about 5 minutes. But after all that's done, the game will be playable. And as you can see, we're getting 80 to 100 FPS at medium settings. The game is still stuttering here and there. It's not perfect. And it does get better as you play. But the stuttering never goes away. You'll always get some here and there. And yeah, but everything else works fine. The controllers work fine. You don't get any aim assist. So if you're playing the characters that are supposed to be precise, it will be very difficult. And you're versing people that are also on keyboard or mouse. So you gotta keep that in mind. And lastly, if you don't want to be dealing with Proton and Lutris and all that, in SteamOS, you can just install the game on Windows. And that will play fine. Shouldn't have any stuttering issues. Shouldn't have any compiling shading issues. And the game should work off the bat, no problem. And FPS should be very similar to what you're getting here. You just don't get the convenience of playing in SteamOS. Alright, I just want to spend some time showing you guys how the game runs on a new map. As you can see, we're getting a lot of stuttering, a lot of frame drops into the 20s and even the 10s. But as time goes on, we should get better performance and the game will become far smoother. And here's the performance of the game towards the end of the match, while the shaders have already been compiled. As you can see, we're getting 70 in the heavier scenes, up to 90 FPS. And still some stuttering, again like I said before, but it is far more playable and way better experience. Now we're playing the game at low settings. This is how the game will look when you change the settings and do a fresh restart. We'll be spending time in the 9 to 10 FPS range for about 8 minutes while it's compiling the shaders. But after this you shouldn't have any issues. This game should be playable again. I'm restarting the game and switching settings around, so it's messing it up and making it worse. But I just want to show you guys how it will look. And here's the actual performance of low settings 800p. We're getting 120 FPS, but in the heavier scenes, we'll drop down into the 80s, 90s. But yeah, the game's running super smooth, not actually stuttering here, surprisingly. But again, this will happen once we get into the heavier scenes. And playing at low settings, the game looks fantastic still. Very hard to tell the difference between low and medium in this game, especially on the smaller screen. So I would personally just play on low settings and get the most amount of frames. You can cap the FPS to 60, 40 or even 30 as well, but you just can't use the quick access button on the right and use SteamOS to cap it. You gotta go through the games menu and cap your FPS there. And I'll show some performance of that as well. Okay, so I capped the FPS to 60 here and I'm using an 8-watt TDP limit for portable play. We're pulling 16 watts, so around 2.5 hours of battery life. And the game's running at 60 FPS with some dips and stuttering like always. But this is a decent portable option. But just keep in mind on your first boot and while the game's compiling shaders, I will turn off the TDP limit and let it run it at its max value so you have more power headroom and that will cause you to have less stuttering. Alright, now playing the game at high settings. This will be the final preset I'll be testing out for today's video. And I'm going to be playing a soldier, so you'll see how hard it is to aim without aim assist. And yeah, in the spawn room we're getting 90 FPS, which is a bit lower than what we had at medium low. We're getting around 100 to 120 FPS in the spawn room. And in the team fights, we're dropping down into the 60s and 70s. We are getting some major stuttering here as well. That's fine, it'll sort itself out. And using the trackpad, you gotta be careful because if you press the trackpad down, it will do a melee attack. So you want to make sure to go ahead and disable the melee button on the trackpad. I will be testing out FSR as well in a second. We can see how much we can get out of it. The in-game FSR is pretty much broken, I believe, but you can always use the system-wide FSR as well and see what we can get there. And again, same as medium settings, quality doesn't look too much better compared to low settings. It's a slight improvement, nothing major, and it's not really worth losing all those frames for a slight improvement in quality. And here's some gameplay towards the end of the match when all the shaders have already been compiled. We are still getting some stuttering, some slight ones, nothing major like we did at the start. So we dropped down into the 10 FPS range. Still had a major one just then, but it's fine. Playing at those higher settings, we will get more stuttering since we are giving a lot more power to the GPU compared to the CPU. But that's the sacrifice you're going to make if you want to have a better looking game. And here's a bit of gameplay with the in-game FSR. As you can see, not much has changed. We're still getting about the same performance, 70 to 80 FPS. Alright, so I dropped the resolution down to 1152 by 720. Still at high settings. And as you can see, the system-wide FSR isn't activating. We are playing in full screen mode. I tried borderless as well, and it wouldn't actually change. So I think the quick access menu is just broken for this game since I couldn't cap the FPS or use FSR in this game at all. So something to keep in mind. Now, even though we are running a low resolution, the game still does look really good and sharp. You can drop it further as well if you want, but the game will look far more blurry than what you see right here. Okay, that's it for the video, guys. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. And as always, if you like what you see, then a like and a sub to the channel I appreciate as well. See you next time.